This podcast is presented by the Prince George's County Memorial Library System.
Hi, I'm Hannah.
I'm Kelsey.
I'm Heather.
I'm Hawa.
And this is our podcast, These Books Made Me. Today, we're going to be talking about Harriet the Spy by Louise Fitzhugh. Friendly warning as always, just like an egg cream that has been left out on the counter for too long, some plot points may get spoiled. 11-year-old Harriet M. Welsh carries her beloved notebook everywhere she goes. She uses it to record her candid observations on the world and the people around her, and plans to be a writer when she grows up. Harriet also thinks of herself as a spy, and even has a designated spying outfit for her spying route, complete with elaborate methods of espionage involving skylights and dumbwaiters. She idolizes Mata Hari as a spying role model. Harriet's observations are both insightful and biting, and they get her into trouble when the contents of her notebook are revealed to her classmates. Even her friends Sport and Janie reject her when they hear what she wrote about them. Her classmates unify in a campaign of revenge. Harriet eventually finds an outlet for her observations and is able to mend the fences with her friends.
Let's take a look at the historic context for Harriet and learn a bit about author Louise Fitzhugh. In the 1960s, interestingly enough, the space race and Cold War infused libraries with a surplus of cash via NDEA grants and Title II. As librarians scrambled to fill shelves with children's materials, publishers stepped in to fill the void as children's books suddenly became huge drivers of profit for publishing houses. Books were rushed to sale, editorial departments were expanded, and authors whose manuscripts were previously declined were finding them quickly snatched up by an author-friendly market. This led to a true golden age of children's literature. This climate, as well as the increasingly relaxed social mores of the 1960s, provided the perfect backdrop for a title like Harriet the Spy making it to print. While Harriet and her acerbic commentary on everyone around her initially proved off-putting to some reviewers, there were very mixed reviews and the book was very polarizing. She resonated with readers of the time. Author Louise Fitzhugh was very much a poster child for the societal shifts taking place during the 60s. Born in Memphis in 1928, Fitzhugh herself had a rather unconventional childhood. Her parents had a very public divorce when she was young, possibly motivated by her wealthy paternal grandmother disapproving of her mother, who came from a working-class family. Custody was granted to her father. Louise had a very limited relationship with her mother, who had been declared unfit, and was often turned away when she tried to visit Louise. Louise bounced around a fair amount before finding a home at Bard College, where she became active in the progressive political scene. She lived abroad in both Italy and France studying art before settling in New York City. She entered the world of children's literature initially as an illustrator. Harriet the Spy was published in 1964 and became integral to a new movement towards realism in children's books. Harriet can be considered a precursor to the problem novel genre and the very special episode trend in TV. Louise continued to publish children's books, often working in political themes such as women's rights. Ultimately, Louise wrote, but was never able to publish, a teen book called Amelia about two girls falling in love. The manuscript has since been lost, but Louise's own life as a lesbian and the scope of her writing has been part of her existing books, including Harriet, to be looked at as important to the LGBTQ+ canon. More on that later. Fitzhugh wrote two sequels to the book, The Long Secret in 1965 and Sport in 1979. There are two other co-written sequels, Harriet Spies Again from 2002 and Harriet the Spy Double Agent 2005. Literally all of these books received mixed, leaning towards negative reviews. Louise Fitzhugh died of a brain aneurysm at the young age of 46 in 1974. Her obituary was published in the New York Times, and her funeral included eulogies from Maurice Sendak and poet James Merrill, who composed and read the following poem. Never would there be a heaven or hell, we once agreed, like those of youth. Louise, if you've learned otherwise, don't tell. Just stick to your own story, humorous and heartrending and uncouth. Its little tomboy damosel became the figure in our repertory who stood for truth. Farewell.
Each episode, our intrepid researcher will enchant us with scintillating factoids related to our book. It's time to dive in and explore Ella's ephemera.
Hi there, everyone. I'm Ella, and this is my ephemera, the part of the podcast where I tell you about some of the neat things I've learned while doing research. So, Harriet the Spy. I do have to confess that I've never actually finished the book, although I was obsessed with the 1996 movie version. And we here at These Books Made Me aren't the only ones who adored Harriet the Spy as a child. In a 2005 interview with CNN National Security Correspondent David Ensor, ex-CIA officer Lindsay Moran stated the Harriet the Spy series of books as an inspiration for her career. She talked in depth about her book, Blowing My Cover, My Life as a CIA Spy, during the interview, stating, quote, "I grew up reading the series of books called Harriet the Spy, and I just thought they were the neatest things, and Harriet was the neatest little girl, and she had a spy kit and would spy on everyone. And I sort of modeled my early life after Harriet the Spy, and my fascination with espionage never really went away as I was a teenager and went to college. It kind of always remained there in the back of my head." But this type of inspiration is probably why Harriet the Spy has faced book bans. Along with the books Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, Blubber, and Where the Sidewalk Ends, Harriet the Spy was almost removed from elementary school library shelves in Zia, Ohio. The local chapter of the Citizens for Excellence in Education pushed for the books to be removed because they, quote, set a bad example for children. They claimed that Harriet the Spy in particular, quote, taught children to lie, spy, backtalk, and curse. But thankfully, the school board voted to keep the books in their library collections. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive. I'm Ella, and this was my ephemera.
All right, let's dive in on talking about this book. So I'd love to hear everyone's personal affiliations with this book. Did anyone actually read this as a child?
I did. What jumps to my mind, even though it seems kind of silly, is her spying outfit. You know, her soft, like salt-scented dark blue hoodie and her old shoes. And I was particularly enamored of her belt with all of her useful tools. It reminded me of Batman's belt.
Yeah, I definitely liked her outfit. And for me, the fact that she always carried her notebook around with her everywhere really stuck with me. And I remember I would always make my grandparents buy me composition notebooks, and then I'd write in like the first 2 pages of it, like all my observations about our little neighborhood. And then I'd like immediately forget and just leave it somewhere. And then I'd read the book again and start this cycle all over again. And the other thing I remember is like not knowing at all what an egg cream is and finding that very confusing every single time it came up in the book.
I still don't know what an egg cream is. What is it?
Does anyone know?
So when I lived in Illinois, I was able to drink an actual egg cream at this funny soda fountain that was a very like throwbacky kind of place. And it's basically just seltzer water with like flavored syrup. So it's like a fizzy Italian soda. And then sometimes they put like milk or cream in it. So chocolate was the one that I tried. And I'd rather have a milkshake, to be honest.
Understandable. Thank you for that.
I was definitely picturing, when I read this as a child, something far creamier and closer to like ice cream or a milkshake. Seltzer was not in my mind at all.
You'd think it would involve eggs.
Yeah,
no?
I definitely pictured an egg somewhere in the mix.
Yeah.
So interesting.
I think a lot of the anachronistic things in Harriet were the things that like I was so intrigued by when I was a child too. Like the dumbwaiter that she gets into all manner of hijinks in when she breaks into someone's home. I was fascinated by that. It was, in my childhood, nobody had a house that had things like that. I didn't know anyone with a house old or grand enough to have a dumbwaiter in it. But man, I really wanted to see one, and I wanted to hide in it and go up and down in a house. That just sounded really, really fun and exciting. And I don't know, it seemed like another world to me.
This book taught me what a dumbwaiter was.
Me too.
I just finished reading this book for the first time. So when the whole thing about the dumbwaiter, I was like on edge when I realized that she was about to get caught. I was like, oh no. But for me, I think reading it made me realize that my personality as a child was very similar to Harriet's. I was really like kind of tomboyish, kind of stubborn. Like, I felt very strongly about the things I felt strongly about. I don't think I would say I was as mean as she was, but yeah.
Agree. I was also very much a tomboy, and so I related to that aspect of the book as well. I think, I don't feel like I was as mean as Harriet when I was a child. I think I was observant, and I definitely had strong opinions about things, but wow, she really doesn't hold back on some of her observations. She's sort of like precursor to tabloid journalism. She's like the TMZ of kids.
She absolutely is. That's a very good way to describe Harriet the Spy. Okay, I think we're going to dive into a lot of that in a little bit, but I wanted to start our conversation by talking about, since a lot of us read it as children and I think loved it and are now rereading it with grown-up 2021 eyes, I wanted to talk a little bit about how some of it held up over the years. One of the kind of first things I wanted to just mention right off the top is some of the Native American portrayals in the book. So Dr. Debbie Reese on her blog, American Indians in Children's Literature, highlights two specific passages in the book that use stereotypical language to describe Native American people. I don't think I need to rehash them, but in those two, in reciting those two specific scenes, Reese ultimately argues that these books, while they may carry sentimental value for many readers, are not recommended for present-day children as they perpetuate negative stereotypes. She says, over and over, Native kids are expected to push through that kind of content for the sake of the other kids. And for me, I was really thrown when I read those two lines because it was so, neither of them have anything to do with the plot at all, which is so annoying that like casual racism is just thrown into these books. So I'm curious, like, what was your reaction when you came across those things?
Same. I didn't retain that from childhood. And granted, it's been decades, I guess, probably since I read the book originally, and it was jarring. You know, that's not the part of the book that I remembered. And I got to it and it was startling and disconcerting, and it added nothing to the text. And it also felt out of place. It didn't in any way further the plot. It didn't give us any insight into any characters. So it was really hard to sort of backwards justify it as just a product of the time. So yeah, that was disappointing to me. And I certainly sympathize with sort of the point of view that like maybe this isn't a title that everyone should have to get through. It shouldn't be a required reading title.
Yeah. Or at least since those are not really relevant, like they don't really push the story forward, like maybe they should be removed at least.
Yeah, I agree with what you guys said about it really had no plot point whatsoever. And I recently finished reading a book by a Native American author, and the main character was like a Native American teenager who kind of was like battling with like her identity and people finding out about it, and like commentary being made and people not really realizing how much of it is ingrained in our society. So I think because I just finished reading that those unnecessary plot points really stood out to me.
Yeah. When I reread this book as an adult, I mean, we were specifically looking for things like that. But although I'm sure I read them as a child, they must have washed over me and I didn't, retain them or take note of them. So it was, shocking to go back and go, oh, there's that. There it is, the casual sexism you mentioned, Kelsey, just there. And like everyone said, it really adds nothing. It's just an unpleasant addition to the book.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
One thing I did think about when I hit those references was even just over the course of my lifetime, how sort of casual references to First Peoples native cultures are just deeply ingrained in America. And we've tried to do better with some of that. But you think about here, we're in the DC area. Football team mascot has been one thing that has been very slow to change. And many people are still really resistant to. I was thinking about when I was in school, what we referred to as sitting cross-legged. I'm very intentional now about calling that crisscross applesauce, but it's certainly not what I was raised on. Obviously, she was writing well before that, but it does sort of show this undercurrent of how ingrained that is maybe in American culture. So I guess on that level, it did make me stop and think more about where has that seeped in my life, that I could be more intentional about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that connects well to the kind of broader realization I think several of us had, that this book is not very diverse at all. I think race is just not mentioned pretty much, but it's implied that pretty much all the children that Harriet interacts with are white. And Heather, I think you pointed out that probably aligns with what would be in a private school, like in her private school at that time, but it is super obvious. It really stands out when you're reading it now.
It totally does. And I feel like that also probably makes it not hold up particularly well for a lot of kids now. Like, this doesn't look anything like the schools that my kids are at. It doesn't look like the school that I was at when I was a child. So that was also pretty glaring to me as I read, where it was like the only diversity that you saw was sort of implied diversity through Olgali, which was a slur, basically. And then maybe some socioeconomic diversity with Sport, whose family was really struggling. But beyond that, there was nothing really there. We did watch the movie together, and I noticed that that was something that they tried to correct for in the movie. They certainly cast the schoolmates as a much more representative group of kids than they appeared in the book.
Yeah. And apparently later Harriet the Spy books, the kind of sequels and co-written sequels that we mentioned earlier, do touch more on racial inequity and social justice. So perhaps this was something that was on Louise Fitzhugh's mind, but she just didn't quite, she wanted to focus more on class in this book. I'm not sure. But apparently that is something that she was thinking about in her life. And yeah, as we mentioned, the movie was more diverse. And there's also apparently going to be a spin-off show that is going to be aimed on being more diverse as well. So that is good.
That sounds interesting. I'm interested to see how that plays out because like you all said, like race is not specifically mentioned, but I don't think there are things about certain characters that make you feel like they can't be kids that aren't white. So I'm interested to see how that goes.
Right. Yeah. And especially being in a neighborhood in New York, it just is like really jarring that she would not encounter one person who was not white in her whole jaunt throughout the city. Like that just seems very strange to me.
Yeah, even if they're not people that are her classmates, but like people that she spies on throughout the, and she seems like she goes all over. So you would think that she would encounter somebody else that doesn't look like her. And I would have been interested to hear what her thoughts would have been on something like that. So I'll be interested to see how the TV show might try to incorporate that. Obviously it won't be the exact words from the book, but it'll be in that Harriet-esque mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was one thing where I sort of paused at that. Maybe she thought that she was presenting diversity by showing class issues. And then I guess there was also the family that runs the bodega seems to be the parents were immigrants. And so that's brought in, but they appear to be Italian.
Right.
So there's still not really any racial diversity, but she does seem to at least somewhat touch on class and maybe cultural differences, but it's pretty minimal.
Yeah. And then the last kind of thing in this how did it hold up realm that I wanted to talk about is Olgali's mom. And I have a lot of feelings about Olgali's mom, but I don't think I should start the rant. So does anyone want to talk about how you felt reading Olgali's mom? Because, oh boy.
Oh, that was rough. That wasn't good. And I noticed they cut that out of the film completely, probably because there is no way to adapt that into something that was more palatable at all.
It was an awful scene in the book. I can only imagine how awful it would have been in the movie.
It was just really cringe. I even just read it was one of the first things that I encountered in the book, and I realized that as we go along, Harriet says other things, but it wasn't even presented as Harriet's thoughts. It was just happened to be how Olgali's mom was described. So it wasn't even like you could even really try to write it off as, oh, this is just a immature child thinking this way. It was just really cringe, to be honest. Like we talked about the earlier point of the Native Americans, it just didn't really add anything to what was the point of it? Right.
Yeah, they were very cruel to her. She clearly had some sort of serious disability they made a joke out of, and it was also unclear. I don't understand how she was living alone.
What was going on there, right? There were layers to how cringy this was. She apparently was significantly impaired enough by whatever was supposed to be going on with her that she was fairly non-functional when they visit her, and yet she lives by herself, apparently quite some distance from Olgali, who just sporadically checks in on her once a week.
In order to teach a child a lesson?
Yeah, it was it was almost like she was taking the kids on a field trip, which felt really inappropriate to me because it's almost like she is putting her mom on display, she's taking them she's not a human being, she's taking the kids to the zoo, which was really, really inappropriate because you don't think of people like that.
Right.
No, and it went so poorly too, right? There was no lesson taken away by Harriet or, to our knowledge, the other kids. It was just sort of piling on with the cruelty, right? It was just judging. There was no insight gained from it. It felt extraneous in a really disturbing way. I don't know why that was there.
Yeah, they didn't just mock her disability. Both the text and as well as Harriet, they mocked her body.
Yeah.
There was a lot of fat phobia in there.
Well, and it's worth bringing up, too, that at least in the edition that I think Hawa and I were reading in, like we have what's labeled as the classic edition, which includes some of the sketches and the artwork that Fitzhugh had with the original manuscript. Those are disturbing as well. That scene, the depiction in the artwork was really, really rough.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, overall, I like that the sketches are included, but like that one, it just, the sketch being included almost just kind of like doubled down on, okay, yeah, this writing is as messed up as it kind of sounds. Like it's just as inappropriate and not necessary as it sounds. The sketch kind of like.
It's like underlining the point.
Exactly,
right.
yeah.
It sort of turned her into this monstrosity instead of a human being. And I'm not sure if that was supposed to play for comic relief. But that definitely does not hold up now. Like that was just kind of beyond the pale for me.
Yeah.
Does not hold up at all. It's awful.
Yeah. So, okay. So those things were not great. I think all of those indicate that maybe this is not a book that we would possibly not recommend for future readers. However, I do want to talk about maybe some of the things that resonated with us. As we mentioned, 3 of us at least read it and really loved it and saw something of it at the time that we were reading it and really connected with it. What do we think it is about like who Harriet is that really spoke to us? Or what did we take from that?
She feels comfortable in her own skin, right? So I think a lot of children's books can sometimes get caught up in appearances, which is normal for kids. I mean, we all get caught up in appearances. We want to be liked. We want to be popular. We want people to value us. Harriet has a really strong sense of self. And I think that there's something positive there. You know, there is, she does her own thing. She knows who she is. She knows what she wants to be. She knows that people maybe disapprove of that at times or are judging it. But man, she holds firm. Like she sticks to it. And I think that can resonate for a kid because all of us have something that maybe we were a little insecure about, or we feel like people don't appreciate in us or maybe judge us for a little bit. And so she is, I guess, in some ways a role model there where it's like, yeah, you know what? It's okay to be a little bit different. It's okay to have a dream that maybe isn't the dream that other people would have for you. She's quirky. She's eccentric. I think that's relatable on some level.
And I know that I think both Hawa and Heather mentioned that they related to her tomboyishness as a child. That was the case for me as well. And I think that it's kind of remarkable how refreshingly free of adhering to like gender norms, especially like gender norms of the 60s, because this book was written in 64, I think. I mean, it's kind of incredible that, Harriet is as comfortable in her own skin as you were talking about, Heather, and she knows who she is, and she really doesn't seem to have any angst about that. And she just is like, well, this is who I am. I'm Harriet M. Welsh, and that's how it goes.
Yeah. There's a book that came out, Sometimes You Have to Lie, by Leslie Brody. It's a biography of Louise Fitzhugh. And in the book, Brody says, Louise declared Harriet a nasty child, and she meant it affectionately. She was a little girl who cursed, lied, spied, and told inconvenient truths. While her nastiness delighted children, she alarmed some grown-ups who decried her as a poor example. So I wanted to talk about this idea of likability, because I think we can admire her, and we do admire her self-confidence, but I think there's a question about whether she's actually a good person. I feel like there's some moral qualms going on.
Hot take here, is Harriet a sociopath? I'm concerned, you guys. She has accomplished a lot of chaos at a very young age. I mean, she's breaking into homes, the spying on people. Okay, maybe we can kind of say, all right, well, she's an observant kid. She's curious. She's interested in things. But she broke into somebody's home. She really never seems to show any remorse for any of the hurtful things she says about her classmates. And then she sort of doubles down on it, because when she gets the newspaper beat at the school,
I was so surprised by that.
Inquirer. Where are the adults here? She's publishing stuff about the one child's parent using drugs and stuff at a party.
They were like, yeah, such and such's dad is stoned out of their mind. I was like, wait, what?
Why is no one editing the school newspaper? That's what I want to know.
Where are the adults in this book, period, I think is really the question. Because they are, and maybe that's a relatable part of the book as well, is like, man, the adults are presented rough in this book.
Yeah.
Like they are incompetent in a lot of ways. They're pretty checked out. They're not really relating to the kids particularly well. You have one child building basically bombs in her home and her parents are like, it's funny, like.
Okay, but I need to talk about the bombs because I feel like Louise Fitzhugh just didn't know anything about chemistry. And so she just decided to just say she was building bombs all the time rather than like talk about any sort of chemical reaction whatsoever. I feel like it was a great opportunity, just like we learned about dumbwaiters and egg creams. Well, we didn't really learn about egg creams, but like the vocabulary. We could learn some science through this. And instead it's just like she's just exploding something every day.
No. Yeah, absolutely. And then you even notice it when Harriet asks Janie, like, what are you working on? And she's like, yeah, Janie never really tells me, but I always ask just to let her know that, I'm kind of interested. But she never gives her a response,
Right.
Which really kind of shows she probably wouldn't have known what to say.
That's a cop-out, Louise Fitzhugh.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I think what you just said, Heather, about this realism is accurate. And I wanted to share another very funny review I found from the Horn book at the time. This person did not enjoy Harriet the Spy very much. And her name is Ruth Ann Vigors from 1965. The arrival of Harriet the Spy with fanfare and announcements of approval for its realism makes me wonder again why that word is invariably applied to stories about disagreeable people and situations. Are there really no amiable children, no loyal friends, no parents who are fundamentally loving and understanding? I challenge the implication that New York City harbors only people who are abnormal, ill-adjusted, and egocentric.
I mean, Ruth's not wrong. Let's look at our best characters here. So Old Golly, who is sort of the paragon of a good adult in this, there's the whole thing with her mom, who she's like left in a shack somewhere to care for herself, even though she clearly can't. That's concerning. I mean, I guess with the kids, Sport to me seemed like a good kid. Like he seems like the one hope to stabilize Harriet and Janie so they don't just destroy the world. They don't become like evil geniuses. He's taking care of his dad to a certain extent. He's dealing with all of the finances. He seems like a nice kid. There's not a whole lot there other than occasionally he bends to peer pressure on stuff, but he doesn't seem all that concerning. But really, other than him, who is there? All the other kids kind of have their own sets of issues. The teachers are all a disaster.
Truly.
They're probably just like likable is her mindset might have been maybe, likable is just not interesting. Which I don't necessarily think that's true, but, I feel like it is a conversation that I see being had a lot within like the reading community. Like, does a character have to be likable in order for you to enjoy the story? I don't think Harriet was necessarily likable, but I enjoyed the story. I thought she was pretty mean, to be honest. But like I also like you mentioned Sport, and I would have been interested to hear more. He sounded like he had a really interesting backstory, so I do think that likable characters can be interesting.
Well, and I also how much of this are we putting on that because it's female characters,
right?
Like the burden on girls is much higher, I think, to be likable, and maybe that's some social commentary coming from Louise. And I think also, she was a feminist and she's also writing from her own experience. So all of these absent parents, like there's so many moms that are just AWOL in this book. Like they're just gone or they're non-entities. They're there, but they're frivolous and they're not involved at all. And I mean, how much of that is coming from her childhood where her mom was not present, though apparently because of her grandparents, not because there was something fundamentally wrong with her mom. I don't know. So maybe there's something in there that she's trying to make a point by making the characters unlikable. But yeah, you read it. And I mean, this is true, I think, as a child, too. You don't leave the book feeling like, man, I wish I had friends like Harriet. You don't at all.
But I think I did leave feeling like, oh, like kids are smarter than the adults around them. Like it made me feel like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. Maybe I shouldn't have felt that way, but I definitely do feel like I felt, oh, I'm capable. Like I can do things. Harriet can do that. I can do that. And she knows what's going on. And adults don't know anything because they don't really. I mean, honestly.
Yeah, and I think it's also really interesting that Harriet is somebody who spies on everybody around her and has so much information about all these people around her, but we still barely know a lot about her parents by the end of the story. That's just my thought. Like, in the beginning of the book when I was first reading, I was like, wait, is she an orphan? Is old Golly like her mom or something? Or like maybe like somebody who adopted her or took her in? And then I realized, no, her parents just aren't really around as much. So I thought that was interesting. I like that you mentioned that, it could be takes from the author's life and not being around her mom as much.
And she really, I think, takes a dig at the more traditionally feminine girls in the book. So she's definitely pillaring the adult women who are living the sort of housewife life or the social butterfly life or just even the social graces. She has no time for those, right? Old Golly is definitely held up as the wiser female adult. But she does that with the kids, too. Like, you look at the way that she depicts the other girls in the class outside of Janie, it's really harsh. Like, they're dismissed as being not as smart, as being sort of obsessed with things that are unimportant, that those likes aren't valid. And I think it's neat that we definitely gravitated towards Harriet as being not the sort of girly girl that, a lot of older books sort of hold up as the model. But then I also wonder, like, how much of that is hard for a kid that is more of the girly girl, right, who does want to have tea parties in a clubhouse, not just, write a tabloid. Like, how much is that dismissive of the spectrum of femininity or just, different ways of being?
Yeah, I think that's why I struggle with this idea that Harriet is like truthful. Like the message that I took away from it, and I hear a lot of like people who reflect on how much they love it, is they say, oh, well, Harriet is just telling the truth and she needs to learn, like the most common phrase, sometimes you have to lie, right? Like that's the thing. People say, oh, she's just telling the truth about how people really are. And she just needed to learn when to tell the truth and when to not tell the truth. But like, I don't actually think she's telling the truth. She's telling her opinion based on her like worldview of like, it's bad to be a girl, really. I mean, that's kind of the message that you take away is like, if you like being feminine, that's probably bad. And I don't love that.
Yeah, it would be better. Well, not better, but I think it would be more interesting if it was, there are different ways to be as opposed to like, this is how I am. And if you're like this, that's not cool.
Yeah. And she even is dismissive. Sport takes on some roles that tend to be assigned to female characters in books. He's cooking, he's taking care of the house for his father, who another there but not really there adult. But Harriet's totally dismissive of that. Like, she's just cruel about what that says about sport, rather than looking at that as like, wow, sports really got stuff together. Like, that's amazing that he's doing all these things as a kid. It's sort of her way or the highway. And any sort of deviation outside of her own from the norm, she's not okay with that either.
I found the amount of responsibility that sport had absolutely heartbreaking. I mean, what are they, like 11? He should not be. I mean, it's another case of the adults that aren't holding up their end of the bargain.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. He's doing things that his parents or his father in this case should be doing for him.
Yeah. It made it like when his father at the end gets that check and they're celebrating, it made it feel kind of hollow to me because it's like, sports should never have known that they needed that money. Like he should not have to worry about or feel relieved now because he doesn't have to worry about the bills in the same way. Like, it's very exciting that they're having this change, this like positive turn in their life, but it's kind of darkened to me by this idea that like an 11-year-old is like stressed about the family's finances.
So I'll come in with my personal experience on this. I don't know that always necessarily comes from the parents. So that was super relatable to me as a kid. I mean, I wasn't even 11 when I read the book, but I was a kid that hid money in sock drawers because we didn't have a lot of money when I was a kid. So like I related to that level of anxiety about like, okay, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? Well, I need to make sure that we are, provided for. And so I think that I liked that was in there because I think that is real for a lot of kids, like whether that's because their parents have sort of abdicated responsibility and put that on them like sport, because man, if sport wasn't doing it, nobody was doing it in that household. Or whether it's just because you're growing up in a house where money's tight and you're a warrior.
You see it even if your parents are trying
right,
to keep
even
it
if
from
they're
you.
not making you aware of it, you know.
Yeah.
And I think especially for him, like he's going to this private school with people that have cooks and house staff, and they're living pretty high on the hog in Harriet's home.
Meanwhile, he's making his own lunches, and he takes like hard-boiled eggs to school for lunch and stuff like that. And I think it's interesting that he said that he wanted to be like a CPA, like an accountant growing up, just because of all that experience that he'd had with managing his dad's money. It's interesting because I thought that he would almost want to take the opposite effect. So I guess I'm glad that it's something that he finds interest in, but it is heartbreaking because at the same time he's like, I have to do this, or if not, we're not going to have something to eat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's searching for that sort of level of control over his own circumstances, and that he's wanting to like extend that into adulthood. I mean, I think that's an interesting character. I mean, in some ways, I feel like Sport was the most fleshed out character in the book because, like you said, we hear a lot from Harriet. Like she's talking all the darn time and writing in her notebook, and we hear a lot from Old Golly. But what do we really know about them as full people at the end of the day?
And I think that Harriet knows so much about Sport, and that she still had like such mean things to say about him. Kind of just, I mean, granted she's 11 and kids are mean, but I don't know. I think that, as a kid, I wouldn't have been able to really imagine having a friend in that situation and not feeling bad for them, even if I didn't know how to put what I felt into words. So the fact that she had these words, was saying such cruel things, like in that scene when he broke out crying, I almost wanted to cry with him, like, because that hurt the most, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me kind of wonder, like, because they all kind of at the end rebuild their friendships, and they don't really talk about it, but if I remember the end correctly, but it's pretty clear they're like, all right, we're going to go back to normal. And I'm thinking, would you be able to go back to normal after your friend wrote that about you in a book? I guess I wonder how realistic that is.
Yeah, you'd never really trust that person again. And I think that's warranted. Harriet never is sorry.
No.
Like that's, I think for me, where the book gets sort of morally blurry, because the take home is, well, sometimes you just have to lie. It's not, oh, Harriet develops some empathy for other people. She feels really bad that she hurt her best friend's feelings in such a deep way, and she tries to make amends. None of that happens at all. Like it's sort of her meanness ends up being her ticket to popularity at the end, because now everyone wants to read her newspaper that no adult is responsible for at all. And just, I think that's a little bit, again, we get back to that review from Ruth Ann Vigors, and I'm not sure she's wrong. And maybe that's just because we're not cool and we're adults now and we're reading it as adults.
Maybe.
I think if it was an adult book, then I think I would be more okay with there being maybe no accountability. Well, not necessarily, but I feel like as a children's book, there definitely should be some accountability for her actions at the end, instead of, oh, hey, we're just going to reward you with this newsletter that you can pour all your mean thoughts into, and you can publish mean things about your dad about to lose his job. Like, what?
Yeah, here's a public platform for your bullying.
Yeah,
right?
And then it was weird because it was just like, there was the whole thing where they voted to see if it was going to be her or the other girl. And I'm like, literally nothing in this story happened for all these people to kind of be on her side to vote in the end, but it just happened. Okay.
Yeah, she literally got a platform to be mean at the end.
Yeah.
And that was presented as a victory.
I mean, does that make this like one of the most like quintessentially American children's books?
Louise Fitzhugh is before her time. I want to add this on this idea of sometimes you have to lie. I want to add this reflection from Celeste Ng in a book called The Books That Changed My Life. She wrote an essay about Harriet the Spy, and she says that even though Harriet's called a spy, she's really a writer. And she says, that's what novelists have to do. If we fiction writers stopped to consider everyone's feelings, we'd never finish a sentence, let alone a manuscript, and we certainly wouldn't be able to see our words published. It's not that there aren't consequences. Harriet certainly learns that lesson, and each of us has to negotiate our own response to those. Do we agree with that?
Does she learn the lesson?
I'm not sure.
I don't think she does. She just learns that she needs to be manipulative in a different way to get what she wants.
That's exactly what I think. She learns how to get what she wants without really suffering any pain or thinking about anyone else.
I totally agree. And I think that there could have been a moment like, so Harriet is incredibly hurt when her friends and her classmates all reject her. I mean, we see her like having some pretty intense emotions about that, but she never connects how she feels with how her classmates might have felt, at least not to the point that it causes her to like truly grow from it. It's just, well, I won't do that because then there's consequences I don't like.
Yeah, there was such a good opportunity for learning there and for her to make those connections. And she never, I feel like I was waiting for it the whole time for her to have a moment of like, oh, I feel like they feel and I should stop making people feel that way. And that thread was never looped.
Like, I thought it might have happened for a second when they sent her that note and when she caught the note that said, oh, Harriet smells. And she's like, oh, do I smell? What do I smell like? And, I initially felt bad for her because I'm like, this is basically like your own private journal with your personal thoughts that kind of got like put out there. And it's almost like, you don't go looking for things if you don't want to find them. Right. But then the story basically ends with her doing the same thing on a public platform. Like literally, it's literally her diary, but her posting it for her sharing it in the newsletter. Literally nothing changed. So it's just like, if at least she was being more, thoughtful about it. No, if anything, she might have got even meaner, to be honest. Now it's like, oh, you guys already know what I've been writing in my journal. So now I'm just going to keep saying really mean things.
Yeah, the lesson seemed to be I can always print a retraction that I don't believe in, which is rough, right? Like, that was my problem as well, Howell. She never has that light bulb over the head moment. She never develops empathy on any level. You think for a second, okay, this is where it's going to click for her. She's going to get it. And she's going to, at the very least, really sincerely try to make amends with Sport and Janie, who she presumably cares about. The other people, not so much. But no, it just motivates her like weird revenge rampage. It doesn't actually produce any sort of catharsis or epiphany on her part that makes her a better person. There's no growth for Harriet in this book, except maybe on the is Harriet a sociopath front, where she learns how to manipulate people to get what she wants a little bit better. It's very like Real Housewives, and I don't love that about a children's book. Like, I feel like these kids are beyond repair before they've even started.
I feel like there was even almost a time, again, where, like, she goes and sees what we presume is a therapist, right? And I'm like, okay, wow, they're talking about, like, mental health here. There could be, like, a avenue for this. And then it really just kind of doesn't.
Yeah. Right. Because, like, his advice was let her write the paper, basically. Find a way to, like, turn her bad behavior into a socially sanctioned behavior. But she doesn't actually change the behavior at all. They just, like, give her a platform, like you were saying, which is
questionable practices, I would say.
For sure.
Okay. So I just want to mention this because I think we've said a lot. So I just want to throw this out there as well. We've talked about Louise Fitzhugh being gay and how that may have shaped a lot of what went into the work. One thing I just wanted to mention is that there's some talk about the boy with the purple socks being kind of a queer character, the purple being kind of a clue. And I'm just curious if you read anything into that, or if what you think that means. What did the boy with the purple socks say to you?
He was another heartbreaking character for me. So I don't know. I'm not sure what he was meant to be in this book. Like, so many of the other kids are pretty clear, like, archetypes, right? Like, you've got Beth Ellen is like meek and kind of mousy and presented as not very smart. And then Carrie's a social climber and a daddy's girl. And, Marion is the mean girl and Rachel is the yes man. Like, everybody kind of has a role. I don't know what his role is or what we were supposed to take from that character. But if somebody infused that character with sort of, hey, that kid is meant to represent this and I can latch on to that and that's awesome, then I think that's fantastic. But I didn't feel like he was super fleshed out, so I never really had a handle on that character.
This is coming to me now as I reflect on it. Doesn't he take off his purple socks at one point and like make them into a flag for their parade that they do?
Yes. So at that moment, he changes his socks to green. So I think, yes.
I don't know what it means that his socks become green, but I wonder if it's like, hey, you were able to use your, like, this aspect of who you are, your purple socks, as a way to, like, support the cause or like move us all forward, or like it was like a benefit or something. Maybe that was why I don't know. It seems like it was very intentionally written to be a queer character, but I like you, Heather, the whole time was like, he seems like we don't really know anything about him except that he has purple socks. So I don't know. Maybe it's the purple flag.
I feel like I need to reread it now with these fresh eyes, even though I just finished reading the book, to try to pick up on some of the clues that you all have picked up on.
What is Mr. Purple Socks trying to tell us?
Yes. I wonder if there's like an article or something, or some like somebody's thesis out there written on Harriet the Spy and the purple socks.
I think there is.
I'm going to go find it.
If we find it, we'll link it in the episode notes.
Was the LGBTQ flag in existence then? Or are we just infusing Purple Socks Boy with symbolism that we have now?
I don't know, but I wasn't even really thinking about it as like being a pride flag, but just like him waving the symbol of himself that he could use for the greater good. Like it allowed him to be more accepted. This aspect of his identity allowed him to be more accepted by his peers.
Okay, yeah, I can see that then. Like that he was letting his freak flag.
Yeah, exactly.
Good for
Love
him.
it.
Be yourself, Purple Sock Boy.
Right, because after that whole thing, he kind of went from being like, okay, this new kid who just showed up last year after we've all been together this whole time, to like, oh yeah, now he's part of our crew, especially since we're waving our hatred towards Harriet. Like,
we're united in this hatred.
We need a brightly colored flag to wave. Coming up, we'll get an expert's take on an important aspect of this novel that is not often discussed. But first, let's pay some bills.
Learn a new language from home or on the go with Mango. Mango's award-winning courses bring you practical phrases from real-life situations in a way that makes you want to start the conversation. Every learner's experience is unique. Mango adjusts to your learning pace, teaching you until you feel confident with new words and phrases, creating a learning solution centered around you. Visit PGCMLS.info and click on the Online Library tab to learn more. Get help with free online tutoring from BrainFuse Help Now. Learners from kindergarten through college can connect to an expert for live one-on-one homework help in a variety of subjects. Visit the Writing Lab to upload a paper for proofreading and analysis within 24 hours. BrainFuse Help Now also offers citizenship coaching and career resources for adults. Visit pgcmls.info and click on the online library to access our online resources for BrainFuse Help Now today.
And we're back. Now let's talk to someone who actually knows something about spies.
I am Hannah Soloyo. I am the Adult Education Experience Developer at the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C.
Awesome. So in the books, Harriet is obsessed with Mata Hari. Can you tell us more about Mata Hari, and is she a good role model for Harriet?
Yeah. So Mata Hari is an interesting spy because I feel like if you ask anyone who's a female spy, you know, the first answer is going to be Mata Hari. I think there are better answers out there in the world. You know, women like Josephine Baker is a great example, who's also an incredible dancer and used her fame. I don't think Mata Hari is necessarily a bad role model. I mean, she is a woman who came from a very sad circumstance, built a career, made herself a brand, was trained in espionage. Unfortunately, it didn't end well for her. She is killed by firing squad by the French because, you know, there's all these stories like, was she a scapegoat? You know, all these different things about her. But Mata Hari, I think the reason Harriet likes her is because of the Greta Garbo film. They mention in the book how she had just seen a movie, and that's how they get her to go, like, agree to go to dance school. That film really is why I think Mata Hari stuck in so many people's minds. The first movie about Mata Hari was made 10 years after her execution. It was a silent film, and there's tons of remakes, tons of TV shows. So she kind of is more of a pop culture. I'm blanking on the word. Sorry.
Icon?
Yeah, icon, or like, you know, we all think female spy, everyone thinks Mata Hari. But most female spies do not take the Mata Hari method. If you watch the Greta Garbo film, she's, you know, seducing officers. And that is not the typical life of a spy at all. especially a female spy.
I guess relatedly, what is your assessment of Harriet's spy techniques? And do you think she has what it takes to be a spy?
So, rereading this book, there are some of her techniques that are really good. So, there's the thing with the dumbwaiter where I don't know how she gets into that dumbwaiter necessarily and is really spying until she's caught. Now, if she was caught in real life, that would be, jail, execution, something quite scary. So her getting caught is a big red flag for me. Also, her writing everything down. Intelligence officers are passing intelligence, but they're not necessarily writing everything they see down. So I was like, oh God, girl, don't do it.
Or at least have like a secret code or something.
Yeah. Have something, like do something with it and make something. But
your messages.
I think the part, one thing she could do really well is because she goes on her spy route constantly. That is very typical intelligence. You are sitting and doing the same thing day after day. It's not the bombs, the James Bond, the running, the jumping. It is sometimes very slow to gather intelligence. So I think maybe she's got that part down. The part I'm the most concerned about, though, is after, the Notebook fallout happens, she says, when I'm big, I will be a spy. I'll go to one country and I will find out their secrets. Then I'll go to another country and tell them and find out their secrets and go back to the first one and write on the second one. And she goes back and forth and back and forth. Most of the intelligence officers I get to work with and know, it's a service to your country. You're doing it, to protect your country. She's just talking about wanting to become a double agent and sell secrets all over the place. So I think she needs to think about where she wants her alliances to lie.
Yeah, and like for two random countries, not even like her country.
She's just like, whoever I can find out secrets, I'm going to sell them everywhere. Which
whoever will pay me in secrets.
I do feel like that's probably what a 10-year-old's view of spying is. It's just listening to everything, knowing everyone's secrets, and selling them. But that's not what a good spy does. So maybe she just needs to think about it a little bit more.
Well, it's good to know that she at least has some practices down because I feel like some reviews of the book say she's more like a journalist than a spy because of the writing aspect and the having a beat that she follows. So it's interesting that there's some overlap there in what spies do.
Yeah.
And what journalists do.
Yeah. I think she almost reads more like PI to me than a spy, which is, people always ask what's the difference between a detective and a spy. Well, you're trying to find something out. Spy is gathering intelligence and you do something with that intelligence that becomes an operation or covert action. She's gathering intelligence for no reason right now. So I think if she had like a purpose to be gathering all this, I think it comes up a little bit when the kids she's trying to figure out what their plot is. So that's her like true one time to gather intelligence and watch and like assess it. But most of the time it's just her, I think journalist is actually a great way. She's just writing down what she sees.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else about Harriet the Spy that I didn't ask that you really wanted to get off your chest?
No, it was really interesting to read it again. I haven't picked up this book in 20 years, so I feel like a lot of it has changed in 20 years for my thoughts. I do think, is it Ogali? I do like how she is the one who talked to her about like girl spies versus boy spies, and like boy spies get trained in guerrilla fighting. She said, well, girl spies get all that training too. And I'm really glad she says that because they will get the same training. So I think that was really nice to read.
Well, thank you so much for providing us your expertise.
No problem. So it was interesting to read again. Thank you for having me.
Harriet is all up in everybody's business. Now let's get into hers and answer the burning question. What kind of cheese is Harriet? With the helpful BuzzFeed quiz. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out the questions and we're all going to answer on how we think Harriet would answer. And I'll let you know what type of cheese she is at the end. The first question is, what's your style? Conservative but cute, whatever is trendy, artsy, or fun and flirty?
Ooh, none of those. I don't think.
Yeah, none of the above for Harriet.
Is she artsy?
I would go artsy, I guess, because that seems most on point of these.
I feel like artsy, when they say artsy, they mean someone who wears like really artistic looking clothing. But when I hear artsy, I think of like an artist who wears like junk clothes they don't want to get paint on, which is why I think I went artsy.
She does wear those like plastic black rim spectacles, which I feel like could be some sort of artsy stereotype potentially.
It's definitely giving hipster vibes with the glasses.
For sure. And I guess she is practicing the art of spying and her clothes are facilitating that. That being said, she could be conservative because she's trying to blend in.
She's conservative, but not cute is the problem.
Not cute at all is the problem.
When I think of artsy, I think of like, being free to be yourself. And I think that with the way she's just like, this is just what I feel like rocking. Yeah, maybe it may not be the typical whatever you think of what girls should be wearing, but this is what I want to wear.
I love it. I think artsy.
I agree.
We're
going to go with artsy. So the next question is to choose a vacation spot. Hong Kong, Rome, Auckland, or Cape Town?
What was the second to last choice?
Auckland.
I don't think Harriet would want to go to New Zealand. I feel like she would just judge everyone there as being like provincial and there's too many sheep. And I think she would just be really rude.
Yeah, I agree. I think she needs to go somewhere really walkable. Like really, like Hong Kong might be good. I don't know if like there's if she's looking for like a downtown kind of area.
She would love how many people are in Hong Kong to spy on. But I feel like she would also not blend in at all, which would be a problem.
Oh, good point.
That's a good point.
So that leaves Rome or Cape Town. I don't know. I feel like Rome could be really interesting. I think about how she was like hiding in like the dumbwaiter, and I feel like she could find maybe some really cool like buildings and infrastructure type things to hide in. I don't know. That might be a reach.
No, I kind of agree with Rome. I think she would like be in like little alleyways and like under bridges and, hiding under a church pew or something and spying on people.
She could do something really creative with an aqueduct, I think.
I think Rome makes the most sense.
All right, Rome it is. How do you feel about pickles? Remember, guys, this is Harriet, not us. Gross. I can appreciate them on a burger, but otherwise I'm good. Never had one. Gotta love a good gherkin.
She has weird eating habits. So, like, I'm sort of torn between her refusing on principle to eat pickles or loving pickles. I mean, her favorite food is like tomatoes and mayonnaise on bread.
She would definitely have a strong opinion about pickles, I feel like.
Do we know if she's
would.
tried one?
I don't know. I don't recall there being a pickle in the book.
That would be a good point. Just because we know that she's been taking these tomato sandwiches to school for so long, and her mom keeps trying to get her to take, or her mom and the cook keep trying to get her to take something else with her. So I really feel like it's between gross, just because she when she talks about the delivery guy and all he's ever eating, she seems disgusted at literally everything he's eating. But also it could be never had one, like you said, because she's been eating tomato sandwiches for so long. When has she tried anything else?
I think she'd feel like both. I've never had one, but also they're gross.
That's probably true. She definitely seems to be very set in her ways about prejudging things.
Yeah.
What are we leaning towards? So we're going to say gross?
I think gross because it might capture both never eating pickles and her disliking them. So I think we kind of hedge our bets there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Works for me.
Sounds good. I agree, Harriet. They're gross.
Oh, love a pickle.
So do I.
I will eat all of Harriet's pickles. She doesn't.
What's your dream pet? A cat, a horse, a ferret, or a dog?
I could see her really rocking a ferret.
Yeah, I don't think she'd want a horse. It's too big and noticeable. It would stick out a lot. She didn't seem all that keen on the cats that the one guy had.
She didn't, but she also mentioned that she didn't seem keen on the cats because she would like to have a dog.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah. I just finished reading the book, so yeah.
She might. So I think with the dog, she might be able to like train it to do certain things.
Oh, yeah.
Or she would enlist the dog as a spy in some way.
But had it not been for that part, I definitely would have guessed ferret, just because this might be a reach. But like, I think about like Perry the Platypus and like from Phineas and Ferb, but I'm like, they're not really the same thing, but like it kind of reminds me of each other. So I was like, it's in between those two, but
you could zip a ferret into your spying hoodie.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Could go with you.
And they don't make a lot of noise. Do they make a lot of noise?
They're pretty quiet.
Do they titter maybe? Like,
I don't. My friend had ferrets growing up. I think they were quiet. They didn't smell great, but they were very quiet.
Yeah, but I mean, we have canon telling us it's the dog. I think we gotta go with the dog.
Text. Yeah,
but at the same time, are we? Yeah, because I'm torn. Because now I'm like, do we want to speak on it in terms of her being a spy? Because I mean, a dog, yeah, you can get a dog, but a ferret seems more of like a dreamy type animal. I don't know, but you're right, canon. We're gonna go with the dog. And one final question: choose a meal. Which I already know how this is going to go. Hot dog, carbonara, French onion soup, or sushi?
Yeah, Harriet's not eating 3 of these 4. I don't think she's even going to deign to try them. So I would go with hot dog here.
Gotta be hot dog.
Yeah, that seems the most likely for her to not, recoil in horror.
Yeah.
Closest thing to a sandwich.
Yeah.
Yeah, closest thing to a sandwich for sure. Even though the French onion soup makes me think of her in the Christmas play the Christmas dance that we never really got to hear more about.
That
as an
was
onion.
my favorite scene. Was it Thanksgiving or Christmas?
Yes,
Christmas,
their
yeah.
pageant where the onion costume.
Be an onion.
She's like rolling around on the floor. But okay, are you ready to learn what type of cheese Harriet is?
Yes.
Okay, drum roll, fake drum roll. Cheddar! You're fun, bold, and confident. Though you sometimes lack poise, you make up for it in heart and honesty.
Oh my God.
Which is so funny because we've been having this conversation about, is it really truthfulness?
I think we nailed it.
I mean, she's a really sharp cheddar.
The cheese doesn't lie.
She's an acquired taste. Not everyone likes the cheddar.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, I feel like Harriet is legitimately more of like a Stilton or she's going to be something pungent.
Gorgonzola.
Yes.
Well, and I know she probably would not put this on her tomato sandwiches, but I feel like cheddar would go really well in a tomato sandwich.
I agree.
It would greatly improve the just mayonnaise and tomatoes.
Yeah, she should switch it up a little
squishy.
bit every so often, Well, thank you for tuning in for that part, guys.
All right, so each episode, we're going to ask whether our book passes the Bechdel test. The Bechdel test asks whether a work features 2 female characters who talk to each other about something that doesn't involve men or boys. We're looking at this because we're looking at books that primarily have strong female characters in them. Do we think that Harriet passes the Bechdel test?
Yes.
Yeah, I think with flying colors, right?
Absolutely, yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. She talks to Janie about blowing things up, I think. About chemistry, at least a little bit. And yeah, that's not the only thing they talk about. But yeah, definitely passes.
And her relationship with old Golly.
Definitely. And she talks about herself a whole lot to everybody.
A whole lot.
Yeah, I think that was an easy one, which is nice we're starting out with one that does pass, because I don't think that's always going to be the case.
Yeah, I think we're going to surprise ourselves as we go on with how poorly some books hold up from sort of a feminist lens, but Harriet did okay on that front, I think.
Yeah, especially considering when it was written. Obviously we know what we know about the author, but it's still interesting considering when it was written, 1964.
Well, that's it for this episode of These Books Made Me. Join us next time when we'll take a trip way back in time and visit another strong-willed girl from New York who won't let anything bring her down, not even a Christmas tree. If you think you know which book we're tackling next, drop us a tweet. We're at PGCMLS on Twitter and hashtag These Books Made Me.